All right, well, today we are in the fifth part of a series called Make Believe. Make Believe. And the question that we're asking is, how do you make yourself believe something, right? Because it's not such an easy thing to do. Where we've started, and it's where we'll start again this week, is just this idea, like this vision of what your life could be like with faith that was real. Now, whether you're a person who considers themselves a person of faith or not, like just imagine that there really is a God up there who cares about you, who wants what's best for you, who wants to earn your trust, and you can trust him. Like imagine, what would you try to attempt? How would that change the way that you wake up in the morning? How would it change the way that you face your challenges? Like knowing that there is a God who is with you, being confident in that. And I believe that God wants to take you there. Like we're not talking about some distant, idealistic, maybe someday, in a fairy tale world we can really, but really like today, here and now, we can learn to have real faith in God. And so that's what our series has been about. How do you make yourself believe? You can't just muster up faith, right? It has to be built. So since I became a dad, I have begun to see things very differently. And what I've noticed is that I don't see things the way that my younger self would think that my older self would see things, right? So I remember being younger and just hating bedtime and nap time and all things sleep. And being like, when I'm an adult, I am going to go to sleep when I want to go to sleep, right? Can anyone relate to that feeling? It's like, yes, absolutely. And that's true. I do go to bed when I want to go to bed most of the time. But on Friday night, like we got all the kids to bed, I was in bed, gone asleep by 9:40, and it was amazing. Like I felt like I had just, won the world championship because I got to bed early. It was like jackpot, right? I also remember when I was younger, I would love to eat snacks like cookies and chips and stuff. And I would always sneak around the house trying to get snacks and like bring them up to my room and hide them in my room. And I was allowed to have snacks at a certain time of the day, but then other times they were off limits. And so I'd like go in and like stick my hand into the Chips Ahoy bag, which was so loud and crinkly. It was like a built-in alarm system, And I remember thinking, when I am older, when I'm a dad, I will never have to sneak around when I want snacks. Well, that's not true. Now I do have to sneak around when I want snacks, but I'm sneaking around my kids. Like, it's amazing. I'll be in the kitchen and be like, oh, Oreos, right? And I like walk over there, look around, and I open it. As soon as my finger touches the cookie, it's like out of the woodwork. My kids are like, hey, what's up? Can we have a bite? Can I have some snacks? Like they just come and they know and they take it and there's one left and it's gone. That's the end of that. And so that's changed. The other thing that's changed is the way that I see movies that I used to love. Like the movie Aladdin. Now I've talked about this before and I told you I was going to move on from Disney movies, but I can't keep that promise. So if you know the movie Aladdin, it's about a young man that lives on the street and he falls in love with this princess. And in the beginning of the movie, Jasmine is in disguise as a non-princess, just like a regular person. And she meets Aladdin in the marketplace. Aladdin steals from some, kiosk with his monkey. And then the three of them, Aladdin, Jasmine, and this monkey, they run away and they run up to this hideout to get away from the palace guard that's chasing them because he stole from the marketplace. And so they get up to the hideout and there's this moment, it's like this really romantic moment, and it looks like maybe they're gonna kiss. We don't know, but there was that tension there. And then all of a sudden the palace guard busts into this hideout and they're gonna get them. And so Aladdin and Jasmine are left with apparently one option. Aladdin is in the window of his hideout, like way up high in the window. He looks at Jasmine and he goes, do you trust me? Anybody remember this scene? He goes, do you trust me? And she trusts him. She grabs his hand and she jumps out the window. And I remember watching that and being like, that's awesome. Like one day I'm gonna be like Aladdin. I'm gonna take the love of my life and jump through a window with her. It's gonna be wonderful. Now I'm a dad. I have a daughter. Now I watch that scene and she's like, do you trust me? And I'm like, whoa, wait a second, Jasmine. Hold on a second. Like, what what has this guy done to earn your trust? He is a stranger you met in the marketplace. All you know about him is that he steals and now he's on the run. And now he wants you to jump out a window. Like, what are you thinking? What reason do you have to trust this guy? How about this? How about, like, there's the palace guard. How about you tell them, hey, look, it's me, Princess Jasmine. Can you take us back to the palace? Let's go sit down with my dad, have a conversation, and, maybe they don't get to get married right away. But worst case scenario, maybe her dad helps Aladdin get a job, Like, they won't have to steal anymore. He's old enough to get married. He's old enough to have a job. Anyway, so it changed the way that I saw movies. So what's my point? My guess is if you were Princess Jasmine, okay? My guess is that if Aladdin were to look at you and be like, do you trust me? Probably you'd be like, look, you're a nice guy. Like, this is great, but I'm not going to jump out the window, right? Like, what reason have you given me to trust you? Probably you wouldn't. I probably wouldn't, right? Some of us have been presented a version of Christianity where it feels like God is in the place of Aladdin, where it's like, do you trust me? Let's go. Like, we're going to take this huge leap. Do you trust me? And I don't know, if you're like me, like for a long time, I felt like, well, what reason do I have to trust you? And I wouldn't have said that, but really that's how I was feeling. Or I'd, be like, well, I know I'm supposed to. Like, I know, like, I've heard, like, the verses about trusting God and having peace, and, like, I've heard it. I know it's up here. But it's honestly, like, here in the heart, like, it's not there. Or maybe even there's been a time in your life where it's like, I want to, but if I'm being honest, like, I just don't. It's not there. And that's because trust has to. It has to be built. And so that's what we've been talking about over the past couple weeks. If trust, what we call faith, if we want to have that, we have to build that. And we believe there are 5 things that God uses to grow your faith. Whenever you hear someone's faith story and you ask them, hey, how did your faith grow? Everything that they say will fall into one of these 5 categories. And the great thing about this is if you're somebody who's been in the church for a long time and you want your faith to grow, you can intentionally incorporate these things into your life. But if you're not a church person and you're like, yeah, I don't know about this, right? Or maybe you're resistant, but maybe you're like, all right, these are small steps of faith you can take and see if there's anything to this or not. It doesn't have to be a huge leap out the window. It can be a small step. And so the first one we said was providential relationships. This is when you ask someone their faith story and they're like, you know what? If I look back on my life and that teacher isn't there, my faith looks very different. Or that friend, or that aunt, or that niece, or that whoever, if they didn't come into my life when they did, my faith would look very different. It's almost like they were providential, like God put them there. The second thing we talk about is practical teaching. When you hear people talk about this, like how did your faith grow? You'll hear people say, for the first time, I heard someone open the teachings of Jesus, explain them to me in a way I could understand and put into practice. And when I did that, I saw that there was really something to this. Not just something to recite or memorize, but something I could actually put into practice. Practical teaching. And then last week, we talked about something called personal ministry. Personal ministry. This is when you get in the game. We said personal ministry is serving other people on behalf of and with the help of Jesus. When you take what you have, which often feels like an only. It often feels like I can only do this, but you take it and you invite God into that inadequacy. You can see him do amazing, amazing things. And so people will say, well, when I was asked to lead this group, my faith took off. Or when I was asked to, when I tried to start this thing, my faith took off. When I finally volunteered in this role at this place, at this soup kitchen, or at this church, or this nonprofit, all of a sudden, my faith, it grew. And so personal ministry grows your faith. Today, the faith catalyst that we're talking about, it's our 4th faith catalyst. And this is where things get, for me at least, they got personal. Before I tell you what it is, though, here's what I want you to do. Ready? A little interactive activity. Ready? On the count of 3, I want everybody to clap once. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Great. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, this is really good. Okay, so Now just think about what happened there, all right? You just performed something really complex. Your shoulder muscles had to do something, your arms, your joints, like a lot of things were involved in that. You picked up your hands, you moved them apart, and then at roughly the same speed, you slammed them together. And you probably did it almost exactly the same way, that 2 times, like those 2 times. And I bet you didn't think about it. I bet you weren't like, well, I'm going to put my right hand slightly lower than my left hand to like make the little air pocket so that there's a nice like sound, right? But you probably it was autopilot. What you just performed is something we call a habit. A habit. A habit is anything in your life that's an automated process. And it can be big or small. So anything from like the way that you scratch your nose. Like, you don't have to think about that process, but it's probably the same way you do it every single time. The way you sit in your car, you probably do it the same way every single time. Our lives, the way you walk is a habit. Our lives are filled with habits. And if we had to consciously think about everything that we were doing all the time, life would be exhausting. If walking is like, all right, well, I got to contract this muscle and extend this, it would be exhausting. And so your brain naturally tries to automate the process. They could be really small things, like the way you clap, or the way you pronounce certain words, or, like I said, the way that you scratch your nose or your head. Or they can be bigger things, like the way that you drive to work, or the way that you drive home. My parents, not too long ago, they moved. And they were on the North Shore, they moved from one house to another house, which is usually the way that works. But it was like they were like 2 miles from each other. And several times I have driven to the wrong house. Why? Because there was a habit that was ingrained there, driving to that house, and I get behind the wheel, I go into autopilot, not thinking about it. That process is automated. I show up at the wrong place. Habits. Habits are extremely, extremely powerful, and our lives are filled with them. We are shaped and molded by our habits. A habit works, they call it the habit loop. It starts with a cue, then there's a routine, and then there's a reward. And as soon as you get the cue, you start craving the reward, and so your body, your mind, like executes the routine. So when I said clap, that was a cue. Or when you go to a game and something happens and you would normally, that's a cue. And so as soon as you get that cue, you are craving the sound of that clap, and so your arms do what they gotta do to make that sound. Your brain tells your arms to do the thing, right? And there's the clap. Cue, routine, reward. The stronger the reward, the more solidified the routine becomes. So toothpaste, when toothpaste first came out, it really did not take off. People were not using toothpaste when they were brushing their teeth. Until this company, I think it was Procter & Gamble, they came out with something called Pepsodent. Pepsodent added a mild irritant to their toothpaste, and they branded it as a minty fresh flavor or feeling. They created a reward, something you actually felt. And so now all of us know the feeling of waking up with like the stick, in your mouth, the nasty feeling. And then you go into, and you crave that feeling. But that's not really, that's like your mouth is like, this burns. But Pepsodent branded it as a minty fresh feeling to create a tangible reward. And so it took off. Now everybody's brushing their teeth and we're all using minty fresh flavors. Habits are extremely, extremely, extremely powerful. And our lives are shaped and molded by them. Think about this. Think about an area of life that you're proud of or that you've made a lot of progress in. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's a friendship, a relationship. Maybe it's a sport. Maybe it's academics. Maybe it's a hobby, but something that you're really good at. My guess is that you are good at that because of the habits in that area of life. If you are excelling in school, I bet you have excellent academic habits. If your marriage is great, I bet you have great marriage habits. I bet you handle conflict very well. I bet you communicate very well. You have a habit of being in touch with each other, of forgiving each other. If you are good at whatever, any type of hobby, it's because you are disciplined in your habits. Jerry Seinfeld's a really well-known comedian. He writes, every single day, he writes one joke. That's a habit that he has to continue to get better and better. Michael Phelps, right, the Olympic gold medalist swimmer, has unbelievable habits. We are the product of our habits. We tend to think, when we want change and growth, we tend to think major overhauls, big changes, drastic commitments. Like, I'm never gonna do this again. Now I'm gonna totally go in this direction. But really, the health of any given area of life is in the habit. And the lack of health in any given area of life is probably because of bad habits. Habits are extremely powerful things. They mold and shape us. Your marital health is shaped by your marital habits. Your professional health, like how you are in the workplace, shaped by your professional habits. Relational, emotional, shaped by your habits. And so here's my question. What do your spiritual habits say about your spiritual health? Your spiritual habits. Now, maybe you're sitting there like, what is a spiritual habit? I don't know if I have any of them. If you don't feel like you have any spiritual habits, you're probably in the majority of people, and the upside, the potential, is huge. Like, spiritual habits sound like something for monks and, like fortune tellers. But spiritual habits are what we call private disciplines. Private disciplines. These are small habits that feed your faith. And so when you hear someone's story, you ask them, like, how did your faith grow? What you'll hear them say is that I did something in private on a regular basis. Like, for the first time, I started spending a little bit of time praying. Or I started reading a book that helped me explain the Bible just for a little bit of time every day. Or it was a small, not a huge leap, but a small step. And it gradually fed my faith. It made a difference, a private discipline. For me, private disciplines, like the way this helped me grow the most is for the first time, my faith started feeling like my faith. It was no longer something that my parents were trying to get me to buy into. It was no longer the faith of some pastor. It was no longer the faith of a friend. It was like, this is my own thing. It actually started to feel like it was something between me and God when I started doing things in private between me and God. And so in the little time that we have left, I want to look at something that Jesus said about the habits that were going on in the religious context when he showed up on the scene. The people that he was speaking to, they were super into spiritual habits, into these disciplines. But they were doing them totally for the wrong reasons. And so Jesus steps in and just like meddles in them and really gets in the face of these religious teachers, the people that are supposed to be leading everyone else. So he addresses their habit, and at the end, when he finishes going over these habits, he drops this really interesting benefit. Like, as if to say, and here's why. And I think it's something we often overlook, and it's something that will have a huge impact on our faith. And so here's what he says. This is in Matthew chapter 6. You should read it on your own at some point. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Now, think about the last time you were practicing your righteousness. This is not like a term that we typically use. What he's talking about these three pillars of the ancient Jewish faith, his audience. It's giving, praying, and fasting. When they were doing those three things, they were practicing their righteousness. That's what he's saying. Be careful not to do it in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven, which sounds like a threat, but he's going to unpack this a little bit. So he goes on to the first one. He says, so when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. This word for hypocrite here, he's talking about the religious teachers of the time. He's saying, like, and the word hypocrite, to us, it's a very derogatory term. Like, no one wants to be called or known as a hypocrite. It literally, in the ancient language, is just a word for actor. He's saying it's someone who puts on a mask. Saying these people are pretending to be something that they're not. Saying when you give, because this is what they were doing. He's not saying you should give. He's saying when you do, they're already doing it. He's saying don't do it like they do to be seen by others. Don't make it an ego habit. He says, truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. These are financial terms. They're transactional terms. He's saying they did it so that people would be like, wow, you're just the best. Like, you're so generous and fantastic. And people saw them and patted them on the back, and they got what they paid for. They received their reward in full. That's it. That's it. They got what they paid for. He says, but when you give to the needy, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be done in secret. And then he says, then your Father, not like this distant judge, like, the giver of the treats and punishment, but your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. He's saying if you go and you do this in private and nobody knows about it, there is no opportunity for it to be corrupted. Like, it is just between you and God. And he says, and God will reward you for it. This reward, in the original language, the word here for reward it means all-inclusive vacation to the Bahamas. No, I'm just kidding. We don't know. We don't know what the reward is. But what we do know is that giving is an issue of faith. And so the habit of giving affects the health of your faith. When Jesus talked about money, he said that it had power to be your master, meaning it had power to call the shots in your life, which sounds intense, but really, stop and think about this for a minute. Do you know anyone that has sacrificed something that they were really passionate about, something that gave them a sense of purpose, maybe even a sense of calling, that they sacrificed and gave up for something that paid more? And sometimes that's necessary, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time, it's money calling that shot. Have you ever seen someone compromise their standards or their priorities, like what matters to them, for the opportunity to make more money? That's in that situation, money called the shot. And that happens when we put our trust, when we believe that money is going to be the source of our happiness. And so what Jesus is saying is, like, when you give, and it's just between you and God, what you're doing is taking the reins away from money, and you're putting it in God's hands. It's like you're starving your faith, your trust in money, and you are feeding your faith in the one who provides. Trusting, like, okay, I'm gonna give this away and know that I will have what I need. And that is an issue of faith. And when you do that, you'll see that God can be trusted. And so the question then is not like sporadic giving, which is good. Sporadic generosity is good. Remember those black envelopes we did like a couple months ago? It's good to see a need and just meet it. But what he's talking about here is regular, habitual giving. Like deciding ahead of time, all right, a percentage of our income, whatever that percentage might be, is gonna go out to things beyond us. It's gonna outlive us. And every time we do that, it's gonna be us saying our trust is not in this money, it's the one who provides. It's not in the provision, but the one who provides. We starve our faith in money and we feed our faith in God. And so how can you make this a habit? Before we started this church, we did our research and we found out that the number one reason people don't want to go to church, or one of the top reasons, is that they think the church just wants their money. So we're trying to be really careful about how we talk about money here. If you don't trust us, right? If we haven't earned your trust, if it hasn't been built, see that? Then you should give somewhere else, like to somebody that you do trust, to something you are thankful for. But this is too important to just say, okay, well, don't give. Because it's a hard thing, because money has the ability to take the reins of your life and call the shots. And so Jesus says, make it a habit, make it a habit. He goes on, next one. He says, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. There's a pattern here. Don't be like the actors, the religious teachers, for they love to pray in the synagogues, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. He says, truly, I tell you, they got what they paid for. They received their reward in full. They wanted to be seen. They were seen. Everyone's like, great, you're so spiritual. You pray with all those fancy words. Good for you. And that's it. That's where it ended. He says, but you, when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Make this about you and God. And he says, then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. What's the reward? I don't know. I still don't know. But what I do know is that praying is an issue of faith. And so the habit of prayer will affect the health of your faith. Right after this, Jesus gives an example of a prayer. It's the Lord's Prayer, which some of you might know as the Our Father. In that prayer, that's a prayer of dependence. For us, one of our biggest issues is this feeling of self-sufficiency. Like we can control our lives and the outcomes of our lives. I think COVID was a little bit of an eye-opener and showed us we don't have as much control as we think. But this feeling like I have to control how everything goes, it gives us so much stress and so much anxiety because we think we have the reins. Like we think that it's our responsibility to make sure everything goes well. And what prayer does, if you know the Our Father, it's like your kingdom come. Meaning like, would this place look like it would look like if you were the reigning king here? He says, your will be done. In other words, what you want to happen, make that happen on earth, just like it's happening in heaven. Like it's a prayer of dependence. Like I'm giving over the reins to you. I'm putting my trust in you. And so that's an issue of faith. And when we do that, it strengthens our trust in God. The habit of prayer affects the health of our faith. And so how can you make it a habit? Maybe for you, like prayer is not a regular thing. I would suggest, not that you like make some major leap and be like, oh, I'm gonna do an hour of prayer every single day. But what's something small and regular? When I was in school, I learned about this prayer. It's called the prayer of examine. And at the end of every day, what some people do, is they go in bed and they pray through the last 24 hours. And they think about what it was like when they woke up, the people that they interacted with along the way. And it's amazing to see what you'll learn about yourself and maybe what God will show you about yourself just praying through the day. There was this big study done on a huge group of people, and they tried the best that they could to like measure whether or not people were growing and how they were growing in their faith. And so they came up with these factors, and of course it was just an experiment, and so the results are not, whatever, like the end all. But what they found is that they're like, there is not one pill for like spiritual growth. There's not like one solution, one equation. But the closest thing we found to people growing in to faith becoming more real to people, the number one thing was when people decide to pray on their own, to read the Bible or something that explains the Bible, like a daily devotional or like today's big idea, which is why we send that out, and journal. When they journal about what they're learning. Now, for me, I heard that and I was like, that's really exciting. It seems like if you do this, according to these people, you're going to grow. But the journaling, like I'm not like a Dear Diary kind of guy. I'm not going to just sit there and just write and write and write. So I just decided I was going to write 2 sentences a day. I got this 5-year journal, and so I can see what I was thinking about at this day, last year, and the year right now I'm on day 3. And so prayer, Bible, journal, when I heard that, I was like, PB&J, hello, can we make a peanut butter and jelly connection? But nobody did. So there you go. Like, how can you make that a habit? Maybe it's a small thing. I'm going to pray before I go to bed. I'm going to pray when I wake up, or I'm going to pray with my wife before I go to bed. You watch how that will change your marriage. Like a very small, we're going to pray together before we go to bed. You just watch. And you'll see he can be trusted. The last thing, this is the most exciting one. You ready? He says, and when you fast, we all love fasting. Don't look somber like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces to show others they're fasting. They want people to see how spiritual they are. He says, but truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. They got what they paid for. He says, but you, when you fast, put oil on your head. This is the only time I would not recommend what Jesus says, to put oil on your face. What he's saying is like to moisturize, right? In that climate at that time, the best way you can look healthy was literally to put oil on your face. Wash your face so that it will not be obvious to others that you were fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And then what will happen? Your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. We don't know what the reward is, but what I can tell you is that fasting is an issue of faith, of trusting God. And so the habit of fasting will affect the health of your faith. Fasting, if you've never heard of it before, it's when most of the time people think of it as not eating for a certain amount of time. But really fasting is whenever you remove or replace part of your routine. So you can fast from food, or you can fast from something else. Fasting reminds us, like it breaks the routine. I read a book not too long ago. It's called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath. It was really interesting. It's about how our lives are shaped in moments, really. And what they said is that it is so important to be like present. It is so important to constantly break the script. People like fly through life and look back and are like, holy cow, how did all that time go by? Because they're just in this routine, like nonstop. He said, you have to break the script. Fasting is a great way to break the script. Take a regular thing out of your routine, and it will remind you. If it's food, every time you're hungry, you'll be reminded of your dependence on God. A great thing to do, I would even suggest this more than not eating food. One day a week, if you're feeling crazy, one day a week, decide not to use your phone or certain apps on your phone. Just watch how, like what kind of refreshment that gives you. It'll bring you back to a sense of like reality, presence in the moment. And it will remind you of every time you reach for it, it'll be a reminder of your dependence on God. Then Jesus wraps this up. He hits those three pillars: fasting, praying, giving. Then he wraps this up. He says something really interesting. Remember, he was talking about how some people try to get their reward from other people, and how the alternative is to get your reward from God. Okay, here's what he says. We're talking about rewards. He says, don't store up for yourself treasures, rewards on earth. He says, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. He says, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. In other words, what he's saying is like there are, think of it like realms, right? Like there is a realm, like what he would call earth, that is, the stuff here is temporary and the value is not lasting. Like it's temporary, it comes and it goes, like the praise from people, like these religious leaders were working for. They wanted people to say, you're so great, you're spiritual. And that's nice, it works for a little while, but then it's gone. What he's saying is that there's an alternative. You can invest in things that don't lose their value, in things with lasting value. And then here's what he says. He says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. When I was younger, I thought that this meant like, okay, so when I do nice things like pray, give, fast, like I get a little treasure, and that treasure's up in heaven, maybe like a little heavenly gold coin. And when I die, my heart will like float up to be with my gold coins that I've accumulated in heaven. But that's not the idea. What Jesus is talking about here is how you care about what you invest in. Or we could say your affections follow your investment. Remember how we talked about how the heart is the seat of what we believe, what we want, what we desire, how we feel? When you invest in something, whether it's with your money or your time or your energy or effort, you naturally care about it. It begins to mean something to you. It's why it's so hard to sell a house to somebody you know is gonna knock it down. If you live in a house for like 20 years and then someone's like, oh, I wanna buy this, knock it down and build a new one, it's gonna be hard to do that. Even though you're getting paid the same amount of money and it doesn't, you have invested in it, and so your heart is in that. What Jesus is saying is some people are investing in these things that have no value, in these things that don't have any lasting value, but he's presenting an alternative. He's saying, feed the things that last, like your faith. Continue to feed your faith. Your habits will feed your faith, and your heart will follow. So think about it like this. Imagine I want to be an Instagram celebrity, right? Like an influencer. And so I hire this agency. I do all this research. I'm like, oh, I got to do this. I start wearing, whatever, really nice things. And like, I put all this time and energy into my Instagram account. And then I take the selfie and I take it 56,000 times, find all the right filters and put it up there. And like, good, done, right? There it is. And I post it, and now this thing I have invested so much in is up there. And then someone comes along and writes, that picture is dumb, you are ugly. That is going to crush me. Do you know why? Because I have fed I have put so much, my heart is in that. And so my mom can come along and be like, that's not true. You're not ugly. You're beautiful on the inside, right? And and you can tell me not to care, but you might know this if you've been in that, you can't not care. And it's because your heart is in it. What Jesus is saying here is that when you are feeding your faith, you are feeding your personal relationship between you and God. It's like you are investing in your faith, and your heart will follow that. And so have you ever heard someone say, like, I want to believe God, but it's not going from my head to my heart? This is what he's talking about. So if something goes really difficult, really bad, and somebody says to you, like, you know what? I know this might be really hard, but I believe that God is going to take good from this. And I think that you'll see it. It will mean something to you if you have invested in your faith, if you have been feeding that area of life. Your heart will be in it. And it doesn't matter if people say, oh, it's not true, that's not gonna happen. Like, it doesn't matter. You can't not care about it because your affections follow your investments. Or we could say, your heart will follow your habit. And so, what is one thing you can do? Now, I don't want you to take a huge leap of faith. I don't want you to commit to like fasting 7 days a week or anything crazy like that. But what is one, maybe you can just like start every day with like a prayer, quick prayer. Just ask God for help. Maybe there's something you're worried about. Ask him to help you with that. Write it on an index card. It's not a journal, but it's better than nothing. Write and be like, today I'm asking God for help with this conflict at work. Just watch. And just watch and make that a regular thing. Put the index card in your pocket and bring it with you to work. Or maybe you decide you're going to give a little bit to some cause you believe in. And it hurts, and you could have bought this with that, but you just watch. And you'll see all of a sudden, God will seem less like a stranger you meet in the marketplace asking you to jump out the window with him, and more like a father that cares. A father that you've learned to trust. Let's pray together. God, thank you that you love us. Thank you that we don't have to work to earn your love. We don't have to ask you to be trustworthy or ask you to take care of us. We just have to build the faith to rest in it. God, would you teach us to do regular things, whatever it might be, whether it's a prayer, or giving something up, fasting from something, little things that will feed our faith, habits that will feed our faith. God, give us creative ideas, creative ways, and show us how our heart will follow our habit, how the health of our spiritual lives will be in the health of our spiritual habits. In Jesus' name we pray.